Thank you so much for remaining with us. I still have the DG Consumer Protection Council here in the studio. Now, the key areas of complaints, mostly, by most Nigerians, would be in the areas of power, sometimes the banks, telecoms, and even hospitals sometimes. Now, in a recent interview, you encourage customers to complain and demand for value for money. Let me quote something you said. Where it is impracticable to challenge the provider, we step in. By we here, you meant the CPC.
Correct.
How much of that has happened and how much more are you willing to do?
Oh, a lot of that is happening. And if you check the data, I mean, I'm monitoring and I see that we're receiving a lot more complaints at the CPC now. And just like a moment before I arrived here today, I was reading an email and I'm getting a lot of feedback that people are getting satisfied with the resolution process. The one thing that happens is that industry itself, they want to protect their brand. So when you have a serious regulator who's holding them accountable, even they step in and are a lot more proactive. And I'm seeing some of that. And a lot more would happen. I firmly believe that the industry must take responsibility and resolve the complaints by themselves. If I have to get in, you don't want me to be there. And the reality of it is that I frown on an approach where the Consumer Protection Council is some kind of an ombudsman where people can just take all their complaints to and leave industry and then we resolve it. Because what it is that essentially government is subsidizing industry. When you create a product and you put it in the market, you've already determined how much the cost of that product and what your margins are. And if it's a consumer product or consumer service, you know that there will be dissatisfaction. You've already made allowances for replacement, refund, fixing whatever the problem is. And so you can outsource that to the government. And so I expect industry to step in and do that themselves. Now, when there are so if industry doesn't resolve this very quickly, I'm going to step in. And that's a secondary level resolution process. And then there's the exception to that is that when I think that something is industry-wide, when I think something is extremely egregious, when I think something is pure exploitation, then the council might take it on itself as an original issue because you want to solve it across the industry, not in just that one single complaint. So when the issue is just a small issue between service provider and their customer, they're the ones who have a contract. There's a social understanding and a contractual understanding where they must resolve it.
So my worry is how much can you take? Let me give you a typical scenario, maybe not a very good example. Let's look at the, say, primary health care institutions in the country. If I go there and I'm dissatisfied, how much of that can you take on? How do you seek redress for me?
Yes, and if you complain to us, right now I've got a very big complaint of something that ultimately resulted in an amputation. I'm going to take on that hospital. I want to take on the professional service providers. And one of the key, in fact, the first project I started on when I assumed office was to meet with the Nigerian Medical Association. I give the association a lot of credit for their most senior doctors and leaders coming in and agreeing to partner with the Consumer Protection Council to develop what really is a patient's bill of right, meaning that there are certain manners and there are certain standards for how patients will be treated, whether it's with respect to confidentiality, with information, right to a second opinion, and fair treatment and all that. And we're working on that, and hopefully that will come out very soon. So that's the starting point. And then I also I'm working with the federal government to reconstitute the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria, which is a disciplinary body. So part of what we do, the vast majority of what we do in those types of spaces is how to prevent or at least diminish, if not completely eliminate complaints or grievances. And so we're doing that back end. So if we succeed in that back end, then the number of grievances or complaints would go down, and that becomes far more manageable. And in any case, because we already established those standards and those levels of care, the people who have to do that work also have a lot of regard for the Consumer Protection Council, and you know that when we call, then there's a problem, and they're likely to respond far better. So I think that that's the method. And if you didn't have a method like that, just looking at the scale of the problem and the number of healthcare facilities, including those who are probably not even accredited, will be such that it would be impossible to get your arms around the problem.
One of the rights of the consumer is rights to information, content, ingredient, what percentage of that ingredient is in the product you're buying. Does the Consumer Protection Council have the capacity to verify the veracity of these claims that we see on the label? For example, a product, a label, it says there is ABC containing this in these percentages. Do you have a way of verifying that on behalf of the consumer?
Yes, we do. However, the approach to appropriate regulation of that is also not to have this massive infrastructure or mechanism for verifying that. It's really about consequence management. And so we're working with SUN, we're working with NAFDAC to say, okay, what are the appropriate things? What is the labeling requirement? Let's make sure that people are labeling their products or their food, or even when it's a service, putting the appropriate disclaimers. And what it is that so when somebody goes wrong, and somebody doesn't deliver on that, we would make sure we proceed in a manner that addresses it across it. And a typical approach to that is that, look, companies are predatory by nature. They're not human beings, and they're set up for profit. And so if for any reason, what could happen if you violate the rights of a consumer is at best somebody says, return what you took. Some people would make a business decision and say, you know what, it's worth the try. So maybe if I take 10, I can get pulled up for 3. I'm still ahead. I've got 7. And so what we're doing is developing a mechanism with the other regulators where the management of the consequences of those types of behavior is such that it discourages others. So first, you're going to lose everything you made on account of that misconduct. There's disgorgement. You would restitute, and there'll be damage to your brand. And so what will happen is that most companies are very well behaved. The only thing is that they'll get away with whatever they can get away with. And so when it becomes clear that if you snooze, you're certainly going to lose, you would see that a lot of that isn't happening that much. And so we won't have to have a system or mechanism where we're verifying everything on a daily basis.
You seem to have quite a lot you're working on. The tobacco industry has been in the eyes of the storm for some time now. And, you know, you have rights group breathing down their necks and asking for these, and this. You were quoted after a meeting with the food, beverages, and tobacco employees that you will work out a mutually acceptable compensation code to address consumer abuse. What will that be?
Okay, good. Now, that statement wasn't primarily with respect to consumption of tobacco products, but yes, they do belong in that association. And what it was that there was a previous investigation into the consumer dissatisfaction with respect to a food product. And what it was, a drink product actually, and what that, it turns out throughout that investigation, it was determined that the company's policy was if you're displeased, so if you buy maybe a box of yogurt or juice or something, and then you find that there's some sediments in it or there's some microbial activity has occurred and you've become dissatisfied with it, the policy, the compensation policy was to apologize and give you more. So you were dissatisfied with one, so we'd give you 10 boxes. We're sure you'd be happy with that. And I think that that's fine for someone who really has that brand loyalty or is committed to continue that consumption. But what about the person who feels, you know what, if this made me sick, the last thing I ever want to do is consume this again. What's the policy towards that? And so I figured we found out that there was no such policy. And so what I was saying to the industry when the association met with me is that, do you guys want to come up with something in the interest of collaborative regulation, or you want me to create something and impose on you? I'm willing to work with you on this. If you create something, you bring it back, we would look at it and come to some understanding, and you'll be industry-wide.
Wouldn't that be giving away too much of your powers?
No, it won't be. I mean, as a matter of fact, we have a responsibility to engage stakeholders in what we do. Because at the end of the day, remember that the contract is between the consumer and the provider.
I'm told we've got only about 60 seconds to go. Let me ask you this question. Not a few people have been asking that if you do indeed want to make any desired impact in your field, then you need to get the states to activate their own consumer protection councils at the state level. Where are we on this?
Oh, and one of the more important projects that I haven't gotten into is actually visiting the states and on a state-by-state basis. And many states do have their own consumer protection committees, which is pursuant to the Consumer Protection Council Act.
You work together with them?
Yes, those state committees are actually branches of the council in some sense, but because it's a partnership between the federal government and the states populate the committees with some of their own people and support with some mutual infrastructure understanding. And so we're working with, I mean, and a good number of states already have these committees that we're working with, and some states are even going on and legislating their own consumer protection laws, like Lagos State, and they're proceeding with enforcement. And so there's, I mean, I think reaching out to the states is going to be vital for us to cover the whole country, and I'm extremely grateful to the governors who have taken this very importantly.
Mr. Rukera, I must thank you very much for finding time to come on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much for
inviting
me.
This. Now, Mr. Babatunde Rukura is the Director General of the Consumer Protection Council and the Chief Executive Officer. That's where we anchor on hard copy. I'd like to thank you for your time, and to you viewers, we thank you as well and ask that you get back to us with your feedback. We're looking forward to them. Share your thoughts with us using the handles on your screen. I'd like to thank you again. My name is Ibrahim Adra. Bye for now.